Hello, listener, and welcome to Contrast Media with me, Patryk Witkowski, and
Me, Ben Francis.
today we'll be discussing the freshly appointed French government. But before we just get into that, we've got Ben Francis with an overview of what happened in the French election 2 months ago and the aftermath of it.
So, 2 months on from its legislative elections, France has finally formed a new government. The government is made up mostly of ministers from Macron's formerly governing party in parliament, Renaissance, but also with a sizable minority, about a third, of ministers from the right wing Republican Party, which only received about 6.5% of the vote in the first round of the legislative election. The government is led by Prime Minister Michel Barnier, who is also a member of the Republican Party and was appointed by Macron a few weeks ago. Barnier is most well known for leading the EU's negotiations during Brexit. Effective coalition government, which has just been formed, has ministers from the Renaissance Party in charge of finance and foreign policy, as well as most ministerial roles, but has right-wing Republicans in charge of notable ministries, including the Minister of the Interior, who has control over migration policy. But given the lack of a majority in Parliament, and an impeachment procedure already being planned by the left at the first chance it gets, the future of this coalition government and its duration are very much uncertain.
Yeah, it's definitely a pretty tumultuous time. You've got a lot of questions and a lot of factors going on. One of the things that you mentioned there was the sort of duration that his government can have. And obviously, I guess what you're referring to there is the potential of a prime ministerial impeachment, which would only take 50% of the parliament to enact. So, talk to me a little bit about what are the chances of an impeachment taking place? Obviously, the left wing coalition has said that they will move for a motion immediately, as soon as they can. What has the National Front said about this? Since obviously their vote would also be necessary for a 50% majority to take over.
Yeah. Well, just firstly, on the left, the reason the New Popular Front are going to impeach him originally is because they, as I mentioned, won the most votes in the election, and originally, the reason it's taken 2 months for the government to be formed, originally the New Popular Front attempted to form a coalition government with Macron's party, and failing that, the party are quite embittered and feel rejected and abandoned by Macron's party. So yeah, just to cover that, as you mentioned, they have said already, yeah, they will be attempting to enact an impeachment the first chance they get. And the National Rally is, yeah, a bit more complicated story, given that the new government is actually a lot more friendly to some of the National Rally's sort of key policies, given the fact that the new government will now have members of the more right-wing Republican Party, which actually aligns quite closely, or at least more closely, with the National Rally on its most important issues of being of immigration and making France more socially conservative, and both the ministries which are most responsible for domestic policy, like prison reform and making sure people can have stricter sentences for committing violent crimes, and immigration, are controlled by right-wing Republicans. It does seem possible that the National Rally will approve of or will not vote to impeach the government. However, the spokespeople for the National Rally have made clear that it will depend whether or not they support the government on what the government's policy agenda is.
Yeah, of course. To sort of, I guess, peacock that point, the prime minister has announced that like a big part of their policy platform will be to control and limit immigration, and obviously that falls in line with the fact that the interior minister, which is a kind of their key to immigration as well, is coming from the Republican side of this coalition,
Yeah.
which will once again likely very much align with the national rally and what they want out of a government. However, what would happen if an impeachment was to go through for whatever reason, maybe just to cause some sort of instability in the system, or just because they weren't happy with whatever the government ended up establishing, and they did go for impeachment? What could be the next steps there?
Well, it seems quite uncertain if the National Rally did actually attempt or vote for impeachment. Because if the government was impeached, then it would fall to Macron again as the president under the French constitution to appoint a new prime minister who would then have to again garner enough support within the legislative assembly to manage to continue, basically succeed where this government fails if it does fail. And that seems like quite unlikely because the legislative assembly is very split between it sort of is split nearly into thirds with the left bloc, the centre bloc led by Macron's party, and then the National Rally in the sort of more right wing bloc. So yeah, if this government doesn't succeed, it seems very unlikely that Macron will be able, or Macron's party would be able to form a coalition with the left or the centre left, because the months of failed negotiations with them have made them feel very betrayed. Mm-hmm. So it seems unlikely, but it is still possible if these left parties really want to push their policy agenda. It depends maybe how practical they are when it comes to trying to get their policies. I think that would be the dependent factor on whether or not a left Macron sort of alliance could end up producing a government after this. But another possibility is it could fall apart and could end up in elections.
I see. So is this correct? To establish first, the left-wing coalition in France is very, very broad. You're talking about what we would consider like more far-left positions and more like center-left positions, all encapsulated in this one block. And the reason why, or I guess one of the main reasons why these negotiations fell through, is because Macron only wanted to align himself and put himself in a coalition with a more centrist parties of the left-wing coalition. Is that correct?
Yeah. More or less, yeah. More or less, Macron in the initial talks with the left-wing coalition, effectively, which did win the most seats in the election, with his initial talks with that party, he was open to appointing a prime minister, but only from his party, and then having members of only the centre-left parties out of that left-wing coalition to then support a prime minister from his party. Where he would have most of the important ministerial positions, presumably, and that's why it failed. So I guess initially, yeah, the coalition failed because it would require the new Popular Front immediately breaking up right after it formed. Mm-hmm. And he was basically saying to the centre-left parties, you have to either choose me or choose your left coalition.
Right.
And then additionally, there would have to be junior members in that party, or in that coalition, in that government, even though a lot of the centre-left party leaders saw themselves, well, actually, all of the centre-left party leaders of the Greens and the Socialists both saw themselves as part of the winning party in the election. So weren't very happy to then become junior partners in Macron's coalition.
It will be interesting to see how like this sort of angle develops rhetoric-wise for future elections, because I think whether it's correct or whether it's wrong, you can definitely make a very, very strong argument about the left-wing coalition in this scenario portraying a lot more principles, a far more principled approach to politics, while Macron, who, after failing to get into coalition with the left, just went straight to the right and aligned himself with the Republicans. Meanwhile, the left-wing coalition wanted to represent all of its voices equally and wasn't willing to sacrifice that for power. I would be interested to see how that emerges with time, that sort of rhetoric. For our last chunk of discussion, and probably our longest, I don't know where you stand on this, but I definitely think this will be the most likely scenario where impeachment won't follow through. The National Rally will be happy with whatever level of more right-wingness they've managed to pressure out of the government, and obviously just the fact that they've got the Republican side there.
Yeah.
Is this result good? Is this representative of what the people voted for? And does this represent a strong functioning system, in your opinion?
From my perspective, when you look at the two parties which make up the majority of this new government, the party which makes up, I think you did some research on it, Patrick, it was 2/3, was it?
Yeah, the government 2/3 of the government ministers announced so far are from the Macron party, and 1/3 is from the Republicans.
Yeah, And so when you look at the actual amount of the popular vote that these parties got in the first round of the election, which is effectively like where people vote for what party they want the most, Macron's party came in third place, and quite a far third place actually. They got around, I think, 22% of the vote, around that at least, and quite a far third behind the New Popular Front, the left party, which got 28%, and then the National Rally, which got over 30%. So the fact alone that Macron's party, which won about 20% of the vote, is now having parliamentarians in 2/3 of all cabinet positions doesn't seem very representative at all, and maybe even more so, the Republican Party, they only won 6.5% of the vote, so a very small amount. They're a minor party.
Yeah.
That's in the UK context, like about what the Green Party, maybe a little bit around what the Green Party got in the election.
And they end up making up a third of the government ministers, which is obviously a big swing in power there compared to like how much of a vote they got.
Yeah, exactly. Because basically 94% of people didn't vote for them. Yeah, a third of all power in the government, or at least all legislating power, is with them. The leader of France Unbound, which is the large left-wing party in the New Popular Front, Mélenchon, described it as a government of the losers. Which I feel like it does betray it quite well, given the fact that the two parties in government sort of lost, because we have to remember last election Macron had the largest party, his centrist party was actually the biggest. They won this election, they came third place. So
I will push back against that a little bit. Obviously, like, you offer some good points there, and I do understand where you're coming from. But it is worth taking into account that, firstly, this isn't wholly uncommon for coalition systems, for party that was like maybe fourth place or maybe even fifth place to end up making its way into government because a party that's first or second uses it to get its majority. This is something that happens in coalition governments quite often. It's not necessarily considered wholly unhealthy. This is just a way of making those systems work. And I don't know if necessarily we have to call Macron's party a party of losers. They did end up getting the second most seats. Now, obviously, that is coming at a loss from their previous election. But one thing that could be considered a bit unfair, and this is something that this is a topic that I'd like to see explored. I'm not ready to make a strong comment on it personally, but I think one of the key reasons why the party in second place from this parliamentary election was able to form a government is just because the president happens to be of that same party. Potentially, if it was a different president and if the president wasn't aligned with them, maybe it would be the left coalition that would have been able to make some sort of agreement of their own. I don't know if they would be. I don't know if they would want to. I don't know if that'd be better. But it's something worth, I guess, exploring. If the only reason why the second most seat party won is just because their president happened to be in power, that could be considered a little bit unfair.
Yeah. No, I definitely think what you're saying about a small party having influence in a coalition, that isn't that uncommon. Like, even in Scotland, the Green Party was quite small. It had influence in the Scottish government. I think, even though some people weren't okay with that, a lot of people understood that that's how coalitions work. But yeah, on the point about the president, I think the reason that makes maybe this situation a bit different is the fact that often in coalitions, the party which had most of the power at least won or came very close to winning. It was a very close match. But yeah, due to the power of the president in the French Fifth Republic, which the transition from the Fourth to Fifth Republic back in the 50s effectively gave the president a lot more power. So now the French presidential system, the president actually has a lot more power, even compared to like the American system, for example. The French president has a lot more power and compared to the legislature, where is sort of pushed to a situation where his party, which came third in vote share, but second in seats as well, didn't even win the seats, let alone the popular vote, is now ruling. I think that's definitely a bit of a symptom of France's very powerful presidential system.
Yeah, I definitely think that this situation raises a lot of questions. I don't think that any sort of country or political system wants to be left in such ambiguity for 2 months and then even then have a result that could be considered contentious. So this will be a developing story. We'll see how it develops. We'll hopefully get to touch on it in the future. And I suppose before wrapping up, do you have any closing thoughts or any message to the listener?
No, just yeah, we will come back to it. Most likely if the government is impeached, and for sure if a new government is formed, because yeah, I mean France, given its first past the post voting system, is generally had quite a stable government for the last 10, 20 years in Europe compared to countries like Italy, for example, which have like government after government, or even Spain, which have like a lot of elections. France has typically been a bit more stable, so yeah, this could be sort of a new chapter, and it could be definitely quite interesting, and I'd be up for talking about future developments.
Yeah, definitely been a year of a bit of election instability. You mentioned Spain there, which also had its like second highest seat party end up forming a coalition that ended up winning and establishing government. But yeah, I think that more or less wraps us up for the topic.
Yeah,
Thank you for taking a listen. Hopefully, you managed to learn something. And with that, we're signing off.
see ya.